Welcome to the Yours in Marketing podcast. Hey, it's Blake here. If this is the first time that you're joining us on the Yours in Marketing podcast, do me a favor. Please go wherever you get your podcast, doesn't matter where, and please review, rate, subscribe to the podcast right now. Well, or after the episode, whichever works for you. We're really looking for your support so that we can build this and make it even more valuable for you. So please rate, review, and subscribe the Yours in Marketing podcast. I thank you from the bottom of my heart. On this episode of the Yours in Marketing podcast, I spoke with Mark Schaefer, the executive director at Schaefer Marketing Solutions, among many other things. He's a blogger, an influencer, and just an overall marketing thought leader. And here are the three key points that we really hammer home on today with this episode. First and foremost, we talk about why influencer marketing is not the Enron of marketing. Next, we move on to talk about how you can humanize your marketing efforts. And finally, we discuss the upcoming rebellion that's happening in marketing and how you can prepare yourself and your company for that. Lots of knowledge here. Obviously, Mark is a huge thought leader in the marketing space, so please stick around and listen to his insights. You will learn a lot. I know that I did. Without further ado, here is the interview with Mark Schaefer. Perfect. So today on the Yours in Marketing podcast, I have Mark Schaefer with me, who is the executive director at Schaefer Marketing Solutions, among many other things. Mark, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good, among many other things.
Let's talk about those other things. What else do you have going on in your life right now, other than just your regular marketing strategy?
Well, you know, what I love most of all really is helping businesses with, come up with their marketing strategy. That's sort of my sweet spot. But I also teach at Rutgers University. I'm the author of 8 books. I am a keynote speaker and work all around the world with that. And I blog. I have a blog called Grow and a podcast called The Marketing Companion. And that's enough to keep me busy.
It sounds like you're kind of a lazy guy.
Yeah, totally lazy.
So I'm guessing you don't have a prototypical day. Like if you were to explain to me on average what your days look like, I'm guessing that doesn't exist. It's just totally different every day.
It is. And that's what I really love. I get to interact with so many different kinds of businesses and so many different kinds of people from all around the world. I mean, just to give you an example, before I started talking with you, I was just interviewed by a marketing executive in Saudi Arabia.
Wow.
Talking about marketing in Saudi Arabia. I also have a marketing retreat called The Uprising. It's a small retreat for like 30, marketing thought leaders that I'm going to be doing twice a year. And so after my call with you today, I'm going to be talking to some people about maybe helping me with some work at the next retreat, which is a lot of fun. So yeah, I'm all over the board, but it's all good and all fun.
And how long have you been at this?
Well, I've been in marketing myself more than 30 years. I started my own business about 11 years ago. Okay. Before that, I was a marketing director at a big Fortune 100 company.
Well, let's go back just a little bit because I do want to talk about a little bit of your education and going into, you mentioned you're a professor at Rutgers. I have a couple of questions around that, but first and foremost, I know that you have a master's in behavioral science, which is really interesting for a marketer to have that background because it ties in so well. But I'm wondering from your perspective, how critical that education has been in pushing your marketing career forward and kind of in instilling the views that you have currently.
Well, I think it's helped me in 2 specific ways. Number one, as a consultant, having this degree in applied behavioral sciences helps me look at the organization in a more holistic way. Organizations are bureaucratic. They can be autocratic. They can be hierarchical. There can be resistance. And so I think that's one of the things that gives me an advantage as a consultant, because I just don't go in and say, okay, theoretically, here's the playbook and this is what we need to do. What I do is look at the whole company and spend time talking to the executives and really get to know the culture. The culture of the company is the most important determination of success. So you've got to come up with a strategy that is actually applicable in that culture. It doesn't make any sense to come up with something theoretical that's not going to work. So that's the first point. The second point, I think, is that the big emphasis in my writing, and I think in my contribution to the field of marketing, does have a basis in some of these psychological principles, and that is that marketers have become too obsessed with technology and their MarTech stack, and they've lost touch with real humans, real customers, real emotions. And we're sort of doing everything our customers hate whenever we concentrate on the technology in ways that just creates automation and spam and robocalls and direct mail that we dislike. And so I think that core foundational education in a human science like that has impacted my view of the world.
Yeah, and now, like you mentioned, being a professor at Rutgers University, just a new opportunity here. But I have a question about that experience specifically. What have you learned so far about marketing to people through teaching other people? Do you see correlations between marketing and teaching? Do those two blend together in your mind?
Well, that's a really good question. I don't think anybody's ever asked me that before, so I appreciate that. For me, I can only respond in a very personal way in how this impacts me. Mm-hmm. There's a symbiotic relationship, I think, between teaching, creating content, and other aspects of my business, like writing books and giving speeches. Because when I teach at the graduate level, and by the way, I'm an adjunct professor, not a full professor, and never want to be. But I'm teaching marketing professionals, mid to senior level marketing professionals, normally from big companies in the New York City area. Mm-hmm. So this keeps me really in touch with what's going on in their world. And their questions may end up as blog posts. Those blog posts may end up as references in a speech or references in a book. But I've really received so much inspiration from my students, and so it all kind of works together. I can't say it's given me any insights about marketing, but it keeps me in touch with the real world, because these are people who are in the trenches, and they're fighting with budgets, and they're fighting with bosses, and they're fighting with trying to figure out how to reach these unreachable customers. And those are valuable discussions for me that I have just on an ongoing basis. And I'm also lucky that many times my students become my friends. Mm-hmm. They become collaborators. So it's something that I love to do.
Taking a step back, so after your education, after you get your master's and all of that, what was your first real marketing job? And then could you just take us kind of on the general journey of your career up until this point from there?
Sure. Well, my love of marketing really started in college, and I was a journalism major and didn't take my first marketing class until I was a junior in college, and fell in love with it. And that's what I really wanted to do, but it was too late to change my major. So I ended up getting a minor in marketing, started my career in corporate communications, and then I sort of earned the right to get into marketing. And with through the company I was with, that route went through sales. So I was in sales for about, maybe 7 years, and very high level sales, like multi-billion-dollar kind of accounts, and then got into marketing. And I was very, very fortunate in that I had such a wide variety of experiences in my marketing role. I actually had an R&D department reporting to me for a while. I got to work on a global level. I got to work in different cultures. I got to work on product development, on pricing. I invented some new things that became very popular. A big part of my job was working closely with transportation, which sounds weird, but marketing isn't just digital. It's really, selling more stuff to more people more often for more money. And sometimes to maximize your profit levels, you've got to look at things like shipping and logistics and packaging and distances and incoming supply chain. And that's all part of marketing that unfortunately a lot of people overlook today. It's sort of fun and intoxicating to focus on all the digital stuff going on, but marketing is still a great big world.
And so now you find yourself, for the past 11 years, you've been on your own. What prompted the shift from working for a big company to all of a sudden saying, I want to do this on my own. I want to build my own thing?
Well, there were a couple things that were happening in that time frame. The first thing is, first of all, I had a great career. I'm not one of those people that said, oh, I can't work for the man. I had a wonderful career, and my company gave me lots of opportunities, including paying for 2 master's degrees. So it was a good deal. Made lots of good friends who are still my friends today. But my last job was the global director of e-business. And one of the things that drives me is learning new things and pushing myself to try new things. And I'm always sort of in a constant state of reinvention. Well, I had this job for about 4 years, and I was really getting itchy, and I needed to do something else. But I was having so much success, they just wouldn't move me out of the job. And then it was year 5, and then it was year 6, and I really needed a change. So the company did come back, and they offered me a job, but it would have required a move to Switzerland. And I was kind of looking at my life at that time and decided, I kind of went back and forth for about 6 months and decided it's time to try something else. I really I found a home in Tennessee. I love where I live. This is my home. I want to stay here. I don't want to move to Switzerland. A significant thing was my kids' college had been paid for by that time. So I sort of had the financial wherewithal to try something new and take a risk. And I had been doing a little consulting on the side. So I knew I could do it. I knew that I liked it. And so I thought, all right, let's take a new direction in my life. And it's worked out great.
I'd be very curious to know, because you started this venture on your own in 2008. Now in 2019, obviously it's a completely different landscape. But in terms of the content creation that you were doing at that time, or the focus on social media, or whatever platforms you were using, I would love to know what you were focusing on in 2008 and what you're actually focusing on now, to kind of see the gap between those.
Well, I think I've evolved a lot as a person, and that, of course, would be reflected in my writing, in my subject matter, and in my tone and approach. And I'll continue to evolve. My writing, my podcast, my books a year from now are going to be different than where they are today. Back then, 2008, we were going into a recession. And so a lot of my writing back then was reflected about strategies that would be appropriate for that time frame. My early approach to blogging was pretty bad. No surprise there, I suppose. And the big change that I made was I was learning really about social media like everybody else. And I had come into this world from a sort of a formal corporate career, formal corporate idea about marketing, where you had your marketing messaging and you're going to deliver these in some timely way to your personas, your ideal customers. And so that's what my blog looked like. It was kind of like messaging that I thought my personas should need right now. And, 2 things happened with that approach. First of all, nothing happened. I didn't have any readers and really no engagement. And the second thing that happened is I was bored. It was boring to try to make up stuff that you think people want to hear or read. And So then I just kind of said, what the heck? I'm going to relax and I'm going to have some fun with it. I'm going to show my personality. And if I'm angry about something, I'll say I'm angry. If I'm happy or confused or whatever, I'm going to sort of begin to insert my personality and my story into this content. And that was the time when everything changed, because instead of me finding my target audience found me. And I found out it was people all over the world. And so that's how things really started to grow for me.
And then that blends perfectly with a lot of what you talk about nowadays, which is humanizing marketing and in all the different ways that you can do that. And you have your newest book. You mentioned you've written 8 books. Is that right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So the newest one being Marketing Rebellion. Let's elaborate on this a little bit and just get some of the finer points there, because it's fascinating what you're talking about here. But if you could explain to the audience what this rebellion is that you're talking about and why it's happening.
Well, the idea for the book started when, it was probably around 2017 or so. And I was doing research for a customer and started diving into some very in-depth studies that had been done by McKinsey, Deloitte, Accenture, MIT, Harvard, and on and on. And this a picture of the consumer landscape started to emerge that was startlingly different from what the companies I work with perceive. So, for example, one of the key ideas in the book comes from, well, there's a number of different research reports that support this, but 2/3 of our marketing is occurring without us. And this is a trend that started really in the 90s with the beginning of the internet. But back in the early days of marketing, a brand was what we would tell people, what we would broadcast, or what we would announce. And today, a brand is what people tell each other. And trust in businesses and brands and advertising has declined 10 years in a row, but people trust each other. They trust personalities. They trust thought leaders and technical leaders and entrepreneurs and their friends and their neighbors. And so there's this sort of dramatic shift going on where the customer is in control of the marketing process. The customer is the marketer. And our advertising and our PR and all these things that we've been doing, they just don't work like they used to. And we sort of see the numbers, but when you apply some of this research to a narrative of how customers have moved away from businesses, how their expectations have changed and businesses haven't caught up, I realized that most of the marketing world is asleep. Truly, they're just asleep. And there was a period when I was writing this book that I literally kind of lost my breath as I thought about the implications of this, that loyalty is sort of a myth, that 87% of our customers are shop around buyers now. And that, engagement, that everybody's fighting for engagement. And it really doesn't matter. There's almost no connection between engagement and loyalty. And you look at some of the things that are moving up, like meaning and purpose and belonging. And it just paints a picture of an entirely different marketing mindset. And as I was working through this, I thought, oh my gosh, I don't know if I have the courage to write this book, because I am going to get shellacked. And actually quite the opposite happened. The reaction has been, look, we see it. We see it happening. We feel it happening. We just couldn't really identify it. You've named it. You've connected to this through research and data, and you've sort of liberated us now to get back to do what we know what we're supposed to do as marketers. So the book has really been very successful and very popular.
When you're in the process of, well, I guess what is your process for taking an idea for a book and then actually deciding that it's worth writing the whole thing? Like, how does that whole process come about for you?
Well, it always starts with a problem that I don't understand. And for example, the book I wrote before this one was called Known: How to Establish Your Personal Brand in This Digital Age. And that came out of this idea that so many things today depend on you being known. Do you want to write a book? Do you want to start a podcast? Do you want to, have a speaking career? Do you want to be invited to speak at a university or to be on a board? And people would ask me these questions. I said, well, you really need to, you need to be known. And I started thinking about this. It's kind of unfair to give this advice and not tell them what that means or how to become known. And I asked a couple of my friends, I said, can anybody become known? Or is there some, like special sauce? And they said, I don't know. I really don't know. So that was the question. I mean, that was the problem that I had to tangle with. And what I found out is there is a process to become known that everybody kind of follows. Some of them know it and some of it stumble into it, but it all kind of goes down the same path. And that became the book. For Marketing Rebellion, the germ of the idea, as I mentioned, part of it was this research that I was seeing. And the other part was that everywhere I went and all of the, these executives I'm talking with at my classes and consulting around the world, they just say, we're falling behind. We feel stuck. Our marketing doesn't work like it used to. And it just became such a theme everywhere I went. I thought, well, it must be that the technology is moving too fast. And that was sort of my original hypothesis. And I started working on this book and probably was about, pretty committed to this idea, started writing it and realized that I was wrong, that it wasn't the technology, it was the customers. And they're empowered and enabled by the technology, but consumer behavior is just dramatically different than it was 20 years ago. And we've been iterating on our marketing. I mean, every year we want to do a little bit better on our Facebook ads and we want to do a little bit better on our SEO or whatever we're working on. But the customers have taken a quantum leap away from us. This is not a time in marketing for iteration. This is a time for bold and dramatic change. And that's what the book is about.
You mentioned that the consumer behavior is just totally different from now versus 20 years ago. Obviously, the major thing happening there is the advent of the internet. But I'm wondering if you think there's anything aside from the internet that has also changed our mentality about consuming.
Well, first of all, I wouldn't say that consumer behavior has totally changed. I think a lot of the issues are that consumer behaviors have sort of been empowered and amplified by what's going on the web today. And I think that not only are there tools available for consumers to discover brands in new ways and engage with brands in new ways, there are also ways consumers can fight back at brands in new ways. And they want to have a voice. And one of the things they're telling us is, we hate your marketing. We hate it. And I mean, the research is very compelling and it's profound that there's a study that I reference in the book that said, how do marketers think they're doing on their job? And it's like 88% positive. And you ask consumers, how do you think marketing's doing on the job? And it's 88% negative.
Mm-hmm.
And there are 600 million people in the world now that have ad blocking software on their smart devices.
Mm-hmm.
This is the biggest consumer rebellion in the history of the world. And our stupid brands, what's their response? Oh, how do we get around these ad blockers and show them more ads?
Mm-hmm. Instead of getting at the root of the problem, which is that they don't want to see ads.
They don't want to see ads. They're opting out of you. They're opting out of you. And so I start my book with a bit of a history lesson to show how every time businesses have tried to abuse and take advantage of consumers. The consumers have rebelled and they've won every time. And they're doing it again. And if we don't listen to them, and if we don't market to them in their way, we're going to lose. That's where the real disruption is occurring today. Some of it might be product development, and some of it might be through, new shipping opportunities or something. But the real disruption is, how do we connect with these consumers? Do we do it in a way that they love, or do we do it in a way that they hate?
I'd be curious to know your thoughts about influencer marketing and the current state of that right now, because you mentioned two separate things that I wonder if they conflict with each other or if it proves the point. But you mentioned that the customer is the marketer now. So in theory, influencer marketing should work really well because of word of mouth and all of that. But then you also mentioned that engagement doesn't matter, which would mean that it might not actually be that impactful. But where do you lie on that? And how impactful do you think influencer marketing really is right now?
I think influencer marketing is critically important, and I think it's just beginning. There's, it's been a little controversial lately, and I think with good reason. You've got, basically it gets down to young people doing silly things that are embarrassing, and that could potentially embarrass a brand, and that's what gets all the news. And someone wrote me recently and said, I think influencer marketing is the Enron of marketing.
That's a bold statement.
and it's a ridiculous statement because there's corruption everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the early days of search engine optimization, it was a cesspool.
Black hat, right? All the way. Yep.
Black hat all the way. Now, was that the Enron of marketing? Was SEO the end of marketing? What about ad fraud? That's, there's corruption in ad fraud. Is that the Enron of marketing? It's corruption, right? So corruption occurs everywhere, but that doesn't mean it's the end of marketing. And look, instead of using this sort of hot button emotional term of influencer, why don't we just use this? Why don't we just call them friends? Because that's what they are. We may not know them personally, but they're someone that we respect and admire and maybe aspire to be someday. We have an emotional connection to them. We listen to them, and they sell stuff. They sell stuff like crazy. And that's our job. So why in the world would we ignore that?
And it's really interesting looking at influencers because they are not, most of the time, not natural salespeople or very well trained salespeople, and yet they can sell well just by the minor influence that they may have. And I think that speaks as well to your point about marketing needs to be humanized, and already is naturally going in that direction, because when people that aren't in sales, that don't have that technique, are outselling salespeople, something's up, and I think it's pretty apparent.
Yeah, I mean, I think the trick is to not really move into this category of sales. I mean, I think what works best is when things are just sort of organic. I mean, maybe in the back of your mind, well, this person's being compensated for this or whatever. But I think we need to keep in mind that 98% of brand mentions on the internet are unpaid. These are just people who love stuff. And that's what moves the needle. That's that 2/3 that I talked about earlier. And so, anyone can be an influencer in some way. And in fact, a lot of attention is being paid right now to this idea of micro influencers or nano influencers that might have 1,000 followers or less, but they can really move the needle because they're a superstar in their niche. And I mean, that's just the way the world works. It's probably always the way the world has worked, but it's just a lot more visible and accessible now because of the internet.
That's a great point. And I'm curious with Instagram is going to start hiding their likes, and the engagement side of things is going to get a little bit muddier. How do you see this continuing to evolve in terms of influencer marketing? What is the impact of those things that are potentially going to happen?
Well, I think it's an interesting time, and I tend to take a non-apocalyptic view of the world. Someone commented the other day, there was a woman, I think, on Facebook, and she said, Instagram is going to hide their likes. Our world of marketing is over. And I said, you need to get up and go take a walk, catch your breath, and get up out of your office and look at the world a little bit. So, I mean, one of the political things that's going on here is that sales are going away from Facebook and Instagram and moving toward influencers. So I think there is a political motive behind this, and an economic motive behind this, that Facebook wants to get more of that back. They want to have more control of the sales rather than introducing this new third party called the influencer. Look, it's such an important trend and such a powerful trend that businesses are going to figure it out. If there's money to be made, they're going to figure it out. I'm guessing there's probably still going to be some sort of private dashboard accessible to individuals and companies that, have some sort of level of engagement. If that isn't going to be possible, then they'll invent something else. I saw that there was a marketing agency in Cincinnati, I believe it was, that invented this new tool where you could save images from Instagram and it would do this like recognition thing. And so it would show you where you can buy it, blah, 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 blah. All right. So that is the main way they're measuring influencer performance, by how many people are saving these photos and putting them in their little digital wallet or whatever. That's a very creative solution that has nothing to do with Facebook and Instagram. So people will figure it out, and there's just too much at stake and too much opportunity for influencer marketing to fail. And I'm not worried about it.
If the main goal of a company that you're working with, for example, is to humanize their marketing, to really take into heart what you're saying here with Marketing Rebellion and go in that direction, how do you help them understand how data fits into all that and facts and using analytics still to humanize marketing?
Well, all good marketing starts with data and research. And I think the big opportunity for data and data analytics and AI is to help us do a better, faster, more accurate job at identifying trends and helping us to respond more quickly and more accurately. I've seen lots of very interesting examples that you can analyze images or analyze data sets and start plucking out new ideas and new trends that are emerging. I think the danger in this is if we only rely on data for our marketing, then that's sort of hard to create any sort of differentiation, because we're probably going to have the same data that our competitors have, unless we have some special sauce way to evaluate it that nobody else has. And I know that's the way what ad agencies are trying to do right now. That's how they're trying to differentiate themselves. But the real insight is going to come from human interactions and getting out there and meeting with customers. There's a story in my book that I think is quite sad and poignant, where a friend of mine and a tremendous marketing visionary, by the way, Martin Lindstrom, gave a talk in front of 5,000 marketing executives in New York City. And he said, how many of you have had a face-to-face conversation with one of your customers in the last 12 months? And out of 5,000 people, 19 raised their hand. And the job, the ultimate job of a marketing leader or a CMO is to kind of be the glue in the company that holds the customer vision together. You've got to be able to translate customer needs and wants and hopes into every department in your company. And there's a tremendous amount of pressure on CMOs right now. There's lots of CMOs losing their jobs right now. And it's a lot of that, I think, has to do with an inability to make this transition, that they're just so stuck behind a dashboard that they're not moving fast enough on customer insights that can create new value.
And then I'm guessing alongside that, if you're with talking about the same company you would be consulting for that previous question, talking about specific softwares or MarTech that they could be using, I'm guessing that you're going to recommend against anything that really automates much, because it's not going to allow you to customize that to the people that need to hear it.
Well, I mean, there's a place for technology, and I'm not a hater of technology. I'm just trying to get people to wake up, I guess, is the best way to put it. And we're in this like technological, we're taking a technology nap right now, where we're just focused on building our MarTech stack, a MarTech stack we really don't understand, by the way. And we're looking at taking out cost and reducing people without really looking at the impact on our customers. I had a story from a friend of mine at a big pharma company, and he said, when he got into this job, he found out that you can buy a mailing list of 1 million people for $20, and there were only maybe 800 people on this list that they really needed to send this to, but the cost is so low. It's like, oh, well, what the heck? Let's just send it to everybody. Well, that's how we get into this culture of spam, because the cost is low and the risk is low, but we're really not thinking about the impact on the customer. We're doing things that people hate. That isn't marketing. When you do things that people hate, and people hate spam. So the problem is when people abuse technology or when they become lazy. And so what I'm trying to do is get people to reconsider where they need to be with their marketing, and look at what are their customers crying out for. There's so many needs in this world. And how do we align with our customers' needs and our customers' values and come alongside them instead of trying to manipulate them and spam them?
Are you aware of, do you have an example of a company that actually is doing a pretty good job of embodying these qualities that you're mentioning?
Well, my book is full of examples. There's lots and lots of inspirational examples. And probably my favorite is a New York-based cosmetic company called Glossier. And this is a company that's really built for this third rebellion in a number of ways. It was started by a young woman who's a blogger. Her name's Emily Weiss. And Emily created this blog that kind of looked at, I guess you'd call it, cosmetic and makeup tips of the stars. And, found these little hacks. And she got a big audience with her blog. And the audience started telling her all the things they hated about the cosmetic industry. How, it was just unrealistic, and they had these unrealistic body images, and they talked down to them. And they said, why can't we have a company that treats us like people, that treats us like a friend? So Emily started a company called Glossier. No advertising, 100% word of mouth marketing. She makes the customer the hero of the company, the center of the company. If you look at her website and look at the people who are demonstrating all the different things on her site, they're real customers who have engaged with them on social media. So, the more they promote the company on social media, the more opportunity they might have to actually show up on their website or something. When they send out a product, it's Instagram ready. So it gets back to this idea. The customer is the marketer. How do we help them do their job? How do we send them something in the mail that will create a conversation, that will create fun and excitement and get them to post about Glossier on the web? And a lot of people just love this brand because they love Emily. The personal brand is the brand. It's hard to love L'Oreal or Sephora. Who's the person that you love at Sephora? But you love Glossier because you love Emily. Emily is cool, and she's involved, and she actually, engages with her customers, and she'll personally answer their questions. Some people don't even realize who it is that she's the founder of the company, and it's the fastest growing cosmetic company in the world. So there's lots of companies like that out there now, that these are founders who grew up in this era, in this era of the marketing rebellion. And they look at the ways that we've been abusing customers through marketing and advertising, and they just think, why would you do that? I don't want that. So why would I do that to my customers? And they're really showing us the way.
I'd love to touch on some social media strategy with you. I know that's something that you're really adept at as well. Looking at your social media profiles, you got a lot of followers. You've built kind of a community around you talking about these things. But I'm curious what those core beliefs you have around social media and growing a social media following are. Are there certain pillars that you stick to that you just won't deviate from?
Well, I think the core idea I started with, going back to the early days of social media and the web, when what was going on back then, it was a wild west. And as you said, it was black hat. People were cheating. They were buying links. They were buying followers. It was just awful. And so early on in my career, I just sort of had a vision that if you just make good decisions and do the right thing, be honest, lift people up, do good work, that will win in the end. There's no way Google's going to let these black hat people win. No way. And if you're able to cheat your way into success, then everything on the internet just sort of crumbles. Look, we still have a lot of that going on, but I'm optimistic that AI developments, it's going to be able to ferret out more and more of this stuff. And the people who are fundamentally good, honest, create quality content are going to win. So that was my strategy right from the beginning. I've never sold a link. I've never had a sponsored blog post. I've never even had an ad on my site. And, I've turned down thousands and thousands of dollars. But I think the second pillar is trust. And it's just not worth it. When people visit me and my content, I don't want to be an ad. I don't want them to ever think, what's he selling me? What's the agenda here? And so for me, it's like, all right, quality work, keep it pure, never, ever breach their trust. And I just have a focus on creating content every time that's relevant, interesting, timely, maybe even a little entertaining. And there's always one sentence that goes through my mind every time I create a piece of content, and it is this: I will never let you down. I will never let you down. I will never publish a blog post or a podcast episode or a book that is going to waste your time, that's not going to be interesting and timely and thought-provoking. It will never happen. And if that day comes, that's when I quit. And that's how you build trust.
I'm curious as well to follow your journey as a speaker, just really briefly here, because there are a lot of people out there that want to be on that path to being invited to speak at conferences and being booked for different gigs for speaking, but they don't really know how to start out, where to lay that foundation. How did you first get your start as a speaker, and then further, what steps can beginners take based on your experience to prepare to get booked as a speaker?
Well, I think the big mistake that people make is they think it's quick and easy. It might appear to be quick and easy, but it's certainly not. And the way I started out is the way you start anything. You start at the bottom. And look, I was, by the time I started my own business, I was a pretty accomplished executive. I had worked all over the world. I had worked with some of the biggest brands in the world. I sat across the table from August Bush. I sat across the table from, the CMO of Coca-Cola. But when I started my speaking career, it was at the local Lions Club. No pay, maybe not even an overhead projector, because I had to start at the bottom. Everyone starts at the bottom, and you've got to hone your craft. And every time you speak, you learn. You learn what works and what doesn't work, and you learn how to handle problems, and you learn how to light up an audience, and you just get a little bit better and a little bit better. And then all of a sudden, someone says, I would really like you to come to one of my meetings that's, a couple hours away. Well, okay. Would you pay my transportation fees? Oh, sure. And then you go to that one and someone says, well, we want to fly you up to New York. This is really interesting. Oh, well, could you give me $500? Oh, sure. We can come up with $500. And that's the way it starts to build. It just, there's no shortcut. There just isn't. You have to be humble. You have to work hard. You have to, just keep practicing and refining. And, if you put yourself out there, you'll learn pretty quick if it's going to work or not, because, you'll be told.
Yeah.
And, if people walk out or they fall asleep, then, you need to check, you need to do something else maybe. But yeah, so that's how I started. I think that's how everybody starts. You just need to be humble. And I think the other important thing that differentiates me, and I think differentiates the greatest speakers, is that I deliver insights. I don't just regurgitate information. I don't put up bullet points and facts and figures. I teach in a way that's interesting, that's entertaining, and you'll hear something from me that you can't hear from anybody else in the world. And I think ultimately that's what takes you to the higher level in a speaking career.
Well, that was very informative for me, and I'm sure for many other people. And I have only one final question, which is a question that I ask most of our guests here. But based on your experience, the 30 plus years that you have experience in marketing, if you were going to just give one piece of advice to a marketer early on in their career on how to succeed, how to have a good career, how to become a great marketer, what would that piece of advice be?
Well, that's a big question. I don't tend to be able to speak in those short terms. If I had to give one piece of advice, it probably would be to stay humble. There's no such thing in the field of marketing. There's no such thing as an expert. There just isn't. There's no such thing as a guru. We're all students. And you just have to put yourself in that position and say, look, I'm just learning like everybody else. And there are people out there that are quicker than me and smarter than me and bolder than me. And I'm humble enough to know that. I'm humble enough to know I need to learn from teenagers. This is the first generation in the history of the world where the older generation is learning from the younger generation. I'm all right with that. I really am. I'm inspired by them. And I think just having that humility that you're open to change and you're open to new ideas and that you don't think you're at the top of the mountain. That is a really key idea in succeeding today.
Well, once again, Mark Schaefer, thank you so much for joining us. I do want to give you a chance to talk about the book a little bit, where people can find it. And then also, if there is anything else, your website, your social media, where people can find you so that they can start asking you questions based on this interview, because I'm sure that they'll have follow-ups.
Well, it's very easy to find me on the web. If you can remember, Businesses Grow. That's where you can find me. That's my website. You can find my blog. You can find my podcast called The Marketing Companion. My books are there. The book that we talked about today is called Marketing Rebellion, The Most Human Company Wins. We also mentioned the personal branding book called Known, but all my books are there. My social media connections are there, all in one handy place.
Makes it real easy for everybody. I highly encourage you to follow him and then spam him with all kinds of questions, because that's definitely what he wants.
Don't even.
Thanks a bunch, Mark, for coming on. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
And that's it for today's episode. Again, if you're a first-time listener or you've been at it since the beginning, please go ahead and rate, review, and subscribe if you haven't already. Wherever you get your podcasts, we've got you covered anywhere you want.